Point 6, true education works in harmony with the process of development. And again, I just want to mention I'm moving quickly through a lot of these. If you want more info, you can read the little booklet. Works in harmony with the process of development. As I read earlier, or mentioned earlier, true education is not the forcing of instruction on an unready and unreceptive mind. The mental powers must be awakened and the interests aroused. So, 2 steps that have to happen here. We have to have the mind must be developed, the mental powers awakened, but there also has to be interest. 2 things, development and interest. Now we find some counsel about development in the book Christian Education. Parents, it says, should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. Okay, so first step, we're describing an early childhood curriculum program here. What age are we talking about? Until 8 or 10. And by the way, there's a gender difference there. We don't have time to delve into this subject deeply. But it's around 8 years in girls, around 10 years in boys, because there's a difference in brain development there. But it says, who should be the teacher? Wow, we really had a good lunch, didn't we? Who should be the teacher? Parents, okay. What should the parents be teaching? Because what often happens is they're like, okay, children need to be with their parents until the age of 8 or 10, and so the parent just takes what is normally done in the school and they do it in the home. But that's not the only factor. It said, as fast as their minds can comprehend it, the parent should open before them God's great book of nature. The only schoolroom for children until 8 or 10 years of age should be in the open air and amid the opening flowers and nature's beautiful scenery and their most familiar textbook, The Treasures of Nature. That is not your traditional kindergarten curriculum today. But the science is now backing this up. I could spend the next 3 hours talking about this one subject from the science. And I'll share just a snippet of it. We know from studies in brain development, the areas of the brain responsible for a lot of academic learning, that's formal, reading, writing, math, sitting down with a textbook, that kind of thing, they are not developed until around 8 years in girls and around 10 years in boys. And that's pretty amazing to me. The science lines right up with the counsel of the Lord. Eye development. The eyes are not completely shaped with collagen fibers and ready for close-up work and 2-dimensional work, such as reading, until approximately age 9. And if we do a lot of close-up work, for more than, actually, the research shows for more than about 20 minutes, it can trigger the ciliary bodies that control the shape of the lens of the eye to actually contract and not want to naturally relax again. And over time, this can cause the elongation of the eyeball and lead to nearsightedness or myopia, which is the most common eye problem in the world today. And the science is absolutely clear. If you study the people groups around the world, those people groups who spend more time indoors and in school at an earlier age have higher rates of myopia. Absolutely clear across the board in the science. Children need to get outside. Other studies have found that being outside actually helps eye health in childhood. Physical development. What are the 2 most common commands given to children in the classroom? Sit down and be quiet, right? Children need to move for their brain to develop. The process of myelination, which is a process of one of the major processes of brain development, one of the chemicals needed for myelination is something called the brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF. And the BDNF is released through a chain reaction of proteins whenever we move our muscles. Literally, children have to move for their brain to develop. And of course, we have the counsel that says, children should be as free as lambs, out of doors, free and happy, spending that time in nature. Now, I do want to clarify, sometimes we've misunderstood this to mean that we give them breakfast in the morning, we open the door, come back at supper time. That's not. But in reality, how many have ever seen any lambs playing? We don't see many of those in Chicago, probably not, but who's nearby those little lambs when they're playing? It's the mother sheep. Mom is keeping a close eye. And so this is not saying the absence of the parents. It's talking, though, about the environment of being outdoors and getting lots of physical activity. So we tell them to be quiet or to sit still, but what about being quiet? Have you ever noticed a group of children playing? Are they perfectly quiet? Hardly. What about a little child by himself playing? Is he quiet? I was going to say, okay, if it's quiet, we get worried, right? Something's up. Usually a little child by himself is talking to himself. And that's because children don't have what's known as inner speech. Inner speech is the ability to internalize your thoughts and process something without having to say it out loud. As adults, after around age 8, we develop the ability to internalize our thoughts and be able to not have to talk out loud. We all catch ourselves talking out loud, thinking out loud, right? but we have the ability not to. But children don't have that. Children actually need to think out loud. So we tell them to sit still and be quiet. We're preventing their brain from developing and preventing them from thinking. Emotional development is another major aspect. Children were designed for that connection and relationship. Up until around, again, we're hitting that same thing that Spirit of Prophecy says, but right around age 8 and up to around 10 in boys. They need this close, a lot of time with, especially with mother, also with dad, this close emotional bond. When we send them off to school, we're breaking that bond and we start triggering a lot of the learning disabilities we see today. In fact, good researchers, when they're dealing with a child who has some kind of learning disability, will often go and study the home environment, and they'll often find abuse, neglect, divorce, something that's actually triggering that supposed learning disability, because the learning and the emotions are so fundamentally connected. The emotional development forms a foundation for a lot of academic learning. Many socialization abilities are actually, get this, they are actually damaged. We actually cause negative socialization by sending a child into an environment where he's surrounded with only peers. It is much healthier socialization to have a wide range of ages, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, older brothers, younger brothers. All this wide mixture of ages is actually far healthier for socialization abilities. And so it's damaged when they're spending all that time in the school with ones just their same age. Interestingly, memory skills are helped by the absence of book-type learning in the early years of life. If we look around the world at the people groups who spend less time in school, the least amount of time in school, they have the strongest memories in the world. And because what happens is we begin, just like I mentioned this morning, we rely on the cell phone to hold our memory. We can do the same thing, especially in the early years when the book always has the information for them. They learn to not have to remember things as well. So we actually develop better memories by waiting to start with the academic training a few years. Reading, of course, everybody's worried about that. We want to teach good readers. The science is absolutely clear, beyond the shadow of a doubt. Children develop better reading abilities if we wait a few years to begin officially teaching them. And in fact, reading is an interesting one because reading is, there's no one particular part of the brain for reading. It's something the brain connects together, pieces together through different parts. So a lot of it depends on how much whole body activity and how many different experiences and conversation and vocabulary the child is developing through everyday life. And more often than not, a well-motivated child will just teach themselves how to read when their brain is ready to put those connections together. It might happen at 6, it might happen at 4. Some children do teach themselves how to read at 4. It might happen at 6, it might happen at 8. But it's important to realize also the development of the eyes. They're not ready for that close-up work until around age 9 or 10. So even if a child does and can learn to read at an early age, it also should be a question of should they? And the research is clear that, okay, it's fine if they want to figure it out for themselves, but we need to make sure they're not spending long periods of time in reading, and we also need to make sure we're not trying to teach it to them at too early of an age. So if they haven't figured it out, we need to wait until around that age 8 to 10 to actually start teaching reading. Although, I'm just giving that caveat that a lot of times a child will figure it out earlier than that. Just to mention, there is a greater effect on boys, a negative effect. Have we seen a lot of problems? I should say, do we see in the school system today that the boys and the young men typically struggle more? Yeah, boys cause 90% of classroom discipline problems. And we chuckle, right? Any parent of boys is like, yep. But boys tend to be, they have a more active learning style, right? They need to be engaged with things, hands-on more. A little girl, can more easily be taught to sit still and be quiet and learn something and learn to read and write and stuff. And it's going to drive a boy crazy because he wants to be doing something. And what the research shows, if we give them a couple more years, wait till they're around 10, even 12, 11 or 12 in some boys, the more active ones, just give it some time. Encourage an attitude of learning, right? Okay, we're not throwing learning to the side. We're just talking about the formal academic environment. When the time comes, when they're ready for it, they will speed right ahead. They'll catch up in a year or two, even months, and they'll actually be more advanced than the ones who started earlier. And speaking on that topic, I often say one of the greatest, or one of the most misdiagnosed disorders in childhood today is ADHD, and the correct diagnosis would be boyhood. They're just more active. There's nothing wrong with that. And the research is quite in agreement with that. One study found a 73% reduction in ADHD by delaying kindergarten entrance for 1 year. 73% reduction by delaying kindergarten entrance 1 year. Can you imagine if we waited till God's schedule, 8 or 10? Many times what we diagnose as ADHD is simply a child who needs to move. They need to get out, they need to get some exercise. They're not ready to be sat down in the classroom. So we're actually triggering a lot and causing a lot of the ADHD. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. There seem to be these two camps. People are like, well, you don't believe it exists. No, I believe it exists, okay? But a lot of times we're actually causing it, and we should be looking to prevent it. And most importantly, spirituality. The early years of childhood are a vital window of time for developing spirituality, caused to affect reasoning, emotion, many relationships, behavior management, language, moral understanding, conscience, and character development are all developed in the first 7 or 8 years of life. And I just believe Satan knows that too well, and he doesn't want us to focus on what is most important. And so he's getting us sidetracked into these other things, in these other academic studies, and all these other sort of things that we put in the early years, when really the message about this waiting until 8 to 10, learning from their parents, learning nature and all this stuff, really the core message is not so much about what we should not be doing as much as it is about what we should be doing. God is really saying, you need so much time to teach and develop a character for heaven. You don't have time for anything else. Wait on the other stuff. Focus on character during those early years. That's the real key in this element of true education.